so much, Georgia, and good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all the participants today. It's a pleasure to have you on the line. And it's also a pleasure to have a broader set of participants than we're sometimes used to for these discussions. Our members are very active in these types of fora, but we're glad to see a wider group of stock exchanges, banks, service providers, and others who are very involved in this particular topic that we're going to be discussing today, which is achieving the SDGs in emerging markets, from taxonomy development to innovation in sustainable finance instruments. So SBFN members are committed to leveraging green and sustainability-focused capital flows to build resilient and inclusive economies. This is one of the key pillars. We have two very important pillars in the work that we do. SBFN started out focusing on the risk management side, but it very quickly became clear that out of risk management and improved ESG performance, you very quickly identify opportunities for the financial sector to be allocating capital with the goals of contributing to climate change mitigation, adaptation, and of a wide variety of sustainable development goals. Therefore, our members have become increasingly interested in the last, I would say, 5 to 7 years, as this topic has taken off within the community, in tools and instruments that can be used to unlock the trillions of dollars in green, social, and climate-related investment opportunities in emerging markets. And IFC has estimated this at approximately 23 trillion in investment opportunities in green and climate-related sectors in emerging markets up to 2030. And this is not the full scale of the opportunity. So we're responding to this interest and the need to map a landscape of sustainable finance instruments that is quickly evolving and expanding. We launched the Sustainable Finance Instruments Working Group in December last year to explore sustainability-focused instruments, including green, social, and sustainability bonds, sustainability-linked loans, transition finance, and more, and in particular, the enabling tools and frameworks that are needed to support this kind of finance. And one of those, as you will have guessed, as it's a key theme in this week's conference, is the development of taxonomies. So taxonomies have become an essential tool to define and evaluate projects, assets, and activities that qualify as green, socially inclusive, and sustainable. They started out as lists of categories or eligible sectors that were identified by our members when they developed national framework documents for sustainable finance. But with the advent of China's Green Catalog in 2015, and then we've seen recent developments with the European Union and a growing number of other countries, these catalogs or lists of sectors and eligible activities have become much more developed and nuanced. And they encompass a few very interesting dimensions. One, it is the identification of activities that can be defined as green or socially inclusive due to the benefits that they have. But these taxonomies also embed requirements around environmental and social risk management as an absolute foundation before you can call something green or inclusive. And these taxonomies guide you towards standards and metrics that you can use to improve and report on these eligible activities. As of April this year, 24 SBFN countries have launched these types of guidelines for sustainability-focused instruments, covering both loans or bonds or wider activities within the financial sector. We had a pension fund representative yesterday who was able to convey how important the taxonomy has been for asset managers and asset owners to define assets in their portfolios. But we also have the privilege of giving an early announcement of an additional country launching their taxonomy that will be featured in today's discussion, which is Sri Lanka. The Central Bank of Sri Lanka will be announcing their new taxonomy at the end of next week at an event that will be extended by way of invitation to other SBFN members, and we look forward to hearing about their journeys. But also on our panel today, we have the co-chairs of the Sustainable Finance Instruments Working Group. We have Mr. Enrico Harriantoro, who is Group Head, Executive Director of the Integrated Financial Services Sector Policy Group at the Indonesia Financial Services Authority, OJK. and he is co-chair of the SBFN Sustainable Finance Instruments Working Group. Our other co-chair, Mr. Giorgio Tritanero, represents the banking and private sector side. He is Secretary General of the Federation of Latin American Banks. And Felabane is playing a very important leading role to convene the banking sector in Latin America around these new opportunities. And then representing the private sector investment asset manager side, we will have Mr. Xavier Demedril, who is the Global Head of ESG Research and PRI at HSBC Global Asset Management. And as some of you may know, IFC partnered with HSBC recently to establish a Green Cornerstone Fund to invest in real sector green bond issuances in emerging markets. And we'll be looking forward to hearing what HSBC has learned about these and other engagements. But first, I have the pleasure of welcoming Dr. Anil Pereira, who is Director of Domestic Operations at the Department, Director of the Domestic Operations Department, and he is the Secretary of the Steering Committee on implementation of Sri Lanka's roadmap on sustainable finance. So he will be representing Central Bank of Sri Lanka today. And with that, I think I'd like to start with Dr. Pereira to kick us off with short interventions from each of the panelists. So firstly, Dr. Pereira, congratulations on the upcoming Green Finance Taxonomy. This is a significant milestone in Sri Lanka's Sustainable Finance Roadmap. And it's also interesting that, and very impressive that Sri Lanka was able to do this in 1 year. This is quite a significant piece of work, and many countries take up to 2 years to develop their taxonomies. So in your opening introductions, we'd love to hear from you. What were the experiences of the central bank in developing the green taxonomy, and what were the successes and challenges and the road forward? Over to you.
Thank you, Louise. Thank you for inviting the central bank to share our experience. I would like to thank the SBFN IFC, the organizers of this important event, and also greetings from Sri Lanka to all the attendees of this important event. So I think one of the keywords or buzzwords relating to this sustainable finance is, I think, taxonomy. I think yesterday we heard a lot of about the taxonomies. So as you mentioned, Sri Lanka is also looking forward to launch a taxonomy very soon. Very briefly, what we have done actually, now the Central Bank of Sri Lanka recognizes the need for aligning the financial system with the SDGs. So we have basically, based on the government policy, we have taken certain bold steps with the support of the political authorities also to implement sustainable finance practices in Sri Lanka. So in this journey, one of the key milestones that we introduced a roadmap in 2019 in order to support the financial sector, basically to align their activities which are basically for the purpose of creating a greener and more sustainable and also inclusive financial system. So that was the start of this journey, and this roadmap was prepared with the support of the technical support of the IFC as well as financial support of BioFin initiative of UNDP. So it was a joint effort. And one of the key action items of this roadmap was to introduce a taxonomy. And we also realize whatever the taxonomy we devise or develop has to be basically on par with the international standards. So we were basically devising a kind of a framework for that matter. And what we thought, such a framework will help our Sri Lankan financial system and the stakeholders to harness the international opportunities or funding opportunities and kind of have some harmonization with the international community. So that was the plan. So to support this process, initially the central bank implemented or established a steering committee within the central bank, and also that steering committee joined hands with the outside organizations. Basically, we have some industry associations like the Banking Association, Non-Bank Association, and also other regulators, Securities and Exchange Commission, insurance regulator, plus the government authorities, especially the Ministry of Environment and related industry ministries. So we formed a kind of a internal steering committee as well as external inter-regulatory committee, and also some of the working groups have been established for them to basically start working on the taxonomy. So one important milestone of this taxonomy development process was we basically received the support from IFC. I should thank, I think, Rong and her team. I think Rong is also here in this webinar. So with the support of IFC, actually, we started both the technical and financial support. We basically streamlined the process of developing the taxonomy. And as you are aware, that was a long, consultation process. A lot of technical experts involved, especially from IFC side. I think they got the support of the technical expert group TEG, consisting of some of the experts who have been involved in developing the European Common Taxonomy. So that benefit was also there for us. And as I mentioned, with the support of local experts as well as international experts, and also the industry, especially the bank association, non-bank association, and other regulators, plus the government, we had extensive amounts of consultation, surveys, discussion forums, etc., etc. So we devised a very clear time-bound action plan for the taxonomy development. And as you mentioned, we are happy that we were able to complete this process in a kind of a stipulated time period. And actually, by the end of this first quarter of this year, we were ready with the taxonomy. Now, other logistics are basically in place. We will be launching the taxonomy nationally and internationally on the 6th of May, very soon. So we are looking for that exciting event. So when developing this taxonomy, I think like any other taxonomies, we based on certain guiding principles, and also certain sectors that would be basically capturing the Sri Lankan requirements as well. So jumping to the success on that context, I think one of the key things, Louise, what we think is basically we were able to devise a taxonomy with the feature of this harmonization attribute. I think that is one of the key aspects. So with the support of these external experts, especially who have been engaged in this IPSF project, so with their support, we were able to develop our taxonomy with an international harmonization, so that comparability attribute is basically ensured. The second thing, based on the national context, we wanted to develop this. So we basically continued a kind of a continuous dialogue with the stakeholders was there. So I think that is one of the key things when you are developing a good taxonomy. It should reflect the aspirations or the views of all the stakeholders of the economy, because being the apex financial institution, central bank alone cannot do it. It has to consult other financial regulators and industry inputs as well. So that we have done. And also you have to ensure that it is under the broad umbrella of the government policy. So as I mentioned, the government is having a broader direction in relation to sustainability. So that's why we basically join hand with the relevant ministries, especially industry, agriculture, environment, and also there is a council in Sri Lanka for sustainability. You call it a Sustainable Development Council. Their inputs were also taken into consideration. And on the other hand, there was another kind of a development happening in Sri Lanka. Basically, even before the roadmap of the central bank, industry, they have started their journey towards sustainability, especially the banking sector. So bank association, they have already implemented some of the principles for sustainability. So with our roadmap as well as development of the taxonomy, now we are in a position to streamline all these different aspirations, because we have some focus based on this new taxonomy. And also, as you are aware now, Sri Lanka is facing some additional challenges these days, especially in the aftermath of the COVID and during the recovery process. So what we think the development of the taxonomy will help us to basically, support the recovery process in terms of focusing on the sustainability aspect as well. There are growing discussions that we should use such opportunities to harness the sustainable or green practices. So I think with this taxonomy, we will be able to do so. And one of the key success points I would like to share. Now, this is basically a kind of this is in parallel with international standards, as well as we have ensured that it is basically serving to local needs. So it is customized. I think we understand and we appreciate IFC is continuing to support for that aspect as well. We are looking for building relevant capacity within the Sri Lankan financial stakeholders very soon. So those are the key, points that I would like to share from our experience, Luis. So I think it was some kind of an exciting journey for us, but we are there. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. I think you've very successfully touched on a number of the key themes that we hear again and again, and your particularly the challenge of aligning with international frameworks versus recognizing and responding to local priorities. So we very much look forward to your launch and to seeing this implemented. Then moving on to a country that is quite advanced on this journey, and I think the recent launch of Indonesia's green finance taxonomy builds on previous work around taxonomy. So it was not the first time that Indonesia was stepping into this space, but I think it's certainly part of broadening of Indonesia's roadmaps over time. And so I'm very pleased to invite Mr. Enrico Haryantoru, who is the co-chair of the Sustainable Finance Instruments Working Group. And in addition, under Indonesia's presidency of the G20, OJK is playing a leading role in the G20 Sustainable Finance Working Group, which is a demonstration of how important these topics are. And in this context, taxonomies have also been a focus. And one thing that OJK has brought to the discussions within SBFN is a reminder that the purpose of these taxonomies is to create investment. And how do we make sure that it is a tool that is used with other tools to create these markets? So Enrico, I'd love to invite you to share a bit more about Indonesia's journey now that you've begun implementing the taxonomy that was launched in January. Over to you.
Okay, thank you, Luis, and everyone. Good day for everyone. First of all, I want to congratulate IFC for the 10th anniversary of SBFN and also hosting this 7th global meeting. Allow me to share some progress we had so far on taxonomy development in Indonesia. Let me start with key mandates in Indonesia presidency of the G20 this year on sustainable finance. One of the main focuses in how to finance the green transition and what policy levers to support it. As a developing country, Indonesia GDP structure is quite dependent on commodities. This includes non-green commodities such as coal as a fossil fuel. Hence, the transition framework must be put in place with a proper balance on risk and return to avoid financial system shock, like result of a transitional risk, for example. Indonesia Green Taxonomy is aligned with the objective of the G20 presidency. It is adopting the traffic light system with the yellow criteria representing the transition element. OJK is now focusing on designing the regulatory reporting framework for financial institutions, or FIs. When they start to report the exposure using the taxonomy threshold, the green portfolio is potentially way smaller than the current figures that were reported so far in their sustainability reports, which is already required since 2017. However, we are more interested to see the magnitude of the yellow criteria. This is where the financial system can promote the climate transition funding by helping the debtors to be green compliant. Despite the red criteria is not a negative list for FIs, shifting towards the green area is the path of our policy. In other words, we want to see how green the FIs balance it. Since its launch, a series of discussions have been conducted in Indonesia Green Taxonomy with the FIs, as well as the supervisor and other internal stakeholders to design the most suitable reporting scenario in the short and long run. So far, we have identified several main challenges at the implementation level. The first is the how to grasp a granular and representative data regularly, while the assessment process of distinguishing green and non-green will be time-consuming, as we all know. How to ensure the consistency of the data as the understanding level in applying the threshold might also differ amongst FIs. And also the third, how to assure the applicability of the threshold that is deemed rigid and dynamic as a result of the changes in the ministry's regulation over time. Despite these challenges, OJK is optimistic about implementing the new taxonomy as it is executed in a gradual manner. For example, the first phase of the taxonomy report, we expect until the end of this year, we will be in form of a piloting program with several big banks reporting their assessment on their loan book. Next year, we hope that the scope will be progressively expanded to other financial sector industries, issuers, and public companies, and use enhanced reporting system. Going forward, we consider collaboration as the crucial key. Policy levels must be integrated not only in OJK, but also in other government institutions, particularly when it comes to designing incentive and disincentive. Global and regional coordination must be closely kept, precisely what we are doing right now. In the regional area, as the co-chair of the ASEAN Taxonomy Board, or ATB, we are actively engaged in the enhancement of the current ASEAN Taxonomy version 1 and continuously adapt its principle to our taxonomy. ATB is currently having a series of meetings to expand the environmental objective in the foundation framework and plus standard, including early talks to embed the social component after the environment. Therefore, taxonomy will be a critical supporting infrastructure to promote the enhancement of sustainable finance instruments and to construct the market. With respect to that, the policy levels shall stimulate the development of innovative financing schemes or instruments. I believe we will hear more updated details on the sustainable finance instruments in the emerging market, possibly during Xavier's session. I stop here. Thank you. Back to you, please.
Thank you so much, Enrico. And I think your highlights and how quickly Indonesia is moving towards implementation are extremely useful for other SBFN members. And one of the things you've highlighted is the link with disclosure, where what we find is that taxonomies don't necessarily have to be considered a mandatory instrument in and of themselves, but they can be embedded in requirements, disclosure requirements as a first step to understand better what is happening in the financial sector, and also, as you say, provides a standard for defining what is green so that there's clarity, even if that means that the previously reported numbers for green lending now go down. What you do have is increased confidence in the quality of those assets. So thank you so much, Enrico. So moving to the banking sector perspective and Latin America, where the taxonomy trend is moving very, very quickly. So Mr. Giorgio Tretanero, we're very pleased to have you as co-chair representing the Latin American Banking Federation. And Giorgio will be speaking to us today in Spanish. And this is a reminder to everyone on the line that there is an interpretation icon in the bottom menu bar of your Zoom screen. So if you need to select either Spanish or English translation, that's where you can do it. So Giorgio, Colombia just launched its green taxonomy on April 11th, and we're seeing regional initiatives to collaborate across different countries in developing common approaches to taxonomies. And this will then open up opportunities for banks to become more involved by aligning their investment strategies with these new definitions. Can you tell us what is happening through Felaban and through your engage with through Felaban, because your engagement with leading banking federations such as Febraban in Brazil, which also has a green taxonomy. What are you seeing as the trend, and what kind of support is needed for banks to unlock the opportunities?
Gracias, Luis. Voy a hacer una pequeña
Thank you very much, Luis. I'm going to do a small reflection so that we can respect the time frame for the next panel and address different specific questions. So I'd like to take advantage and take this space for thanking the IFC for this, and also the Vice President, Martin Spieslet, the General Director for Latin America and the Caribbean, and also to thank the IFC for their 10-year activities anniversary, and my colleagues here, and all of our virtual audience for their participation. The different investment needs has 623 banks from Mexico to Chile and all Central America and the Caribbean. We see the different challenges, and it has an immense potential to promote said transition. This is relevant, for example, at the light of the pandemic, because the different governments replanted different investment plans for different fronts, including those regarding environmental sustainability to stop the devastating effects of a pandemic in their health sectors and the different levels of poverty, which of course enhance the different gaps for financing. And here the private institutions, financial institutions played a key role. Also, anticipating these effects for climate change creates the necessity of creating projects and that are less depending on fossil fuels. So we have different key aspects which are particular to orient investors on the delimitation of activities that could be considered as feasible for the detailed follow-up of the different allocation for resources in the investment towards green projects. Despite its recent creation, it proves to be useful as a tool for clear projects for investment. They level up the game plan for the language when we use the green finances term, for example, and the different coordination of the different activities. And it also promotes transparency and information about sustainability and green finances, which creates a virtuous cycle that creates reliable data for this topic. And in the context area, as you call it, Luis, recently, we had the green finances launching in Colombia, the taxonomy, also the different launches. And all of the green taxonomies are constituted as an opportunity to deepen the different fixed income and fixed profit institutions. And actually in Latin America, and I'm sure that in other emerging markets, this market, it has been underused for the different taxonomies for green energies, and it has been an enabler for this economy. And despite all of this, from the FELA Bank, we consider banking credits to continue to be an essential factor in the region, because in different countries, these tend to be not so developed and not so sophisticated, with a limited potential for the green finances flow that our region needs. I am convinced that this process will be gradually increasing, and we will allocate more resources, especially from smaller banks, cooperative institutions, and smaller institutions. Actually, these financial institutions that are small have been traditionally on the limits of this trend, not because of a lack of interest, but the lack of profit for that aim. So for that reason, I would like to take this space to highlight the positive role that the IFC has played for the creation of these capacities trainings and promoting of the success cases in Latin America. Finally, although taxonomies don't reach the SDGs, they do contribute in the mitigation for climate change in the industry and the company sector to promote and finance their green activities that will promote sustainably or green sustainable aspects and activities that will contribute to different local perspectives. I trust, although the environmental sector changes continuously, I trust that green financial taxonomies will change as well, and they represent not just one, but two different steps towards the mitigation of climate change. And also, we will help follow up investments to have the certainty that the final allocation will allow every group in the banking sector, will allow to identify the different items that are to be identified. In our region, Brazil and Colombia are at the front. And actually, this is a trend that is continuing to grow in or amongst Latin American banks. Thank you very much for this opportunity. I stop here because I know that there will be a Q&A section, and I want to give more space to everyone else. Thank you very much, Luis.
Thank you so much, Giorgio. And you highlighted some very useful points there, particularly as we move into the implementation phase of taxonomies, the need for capacity building, and that there's still quite a lot of problem solving needed for certain sectors and certain new types of investments, particularly for smaller financial institutions. So thank you so much. You also highlight the fact that taxonomies currently focus on climate mitigation and climate adaptation. But we are seeing a lot of interest from members to move into social taxonomies and to broaden the definitions of eligible assets, hopefully in line with the SDGs in the future. So looking at this field of opportunity and also noting that our third co-chair for the working group is the National Treasury of South Africa. They're not with us today, but they launched their taxonomy on the 1st of April, and they have aligned with themselves with the European Union. And in this, the European Union has been collaborating with South Africa to evaluate the practical application for EU investors. And so I'm very pleased to welcome one of those EU investors, Mr. Xavier Demidre from HSBC. HSBC is very active in this space. We would love to hear from you. How do taxonomies and these types of supporting elements make it easier for you to invest in emerging markets and to reduce the risks? And what other things do you need to see being put in place?
Thank you very much, Louise. Well, actually, it's indeed very important because we want to know where we lay our feet. And simply because we've got a fiduciary duty and are only acting on behalf of our clients. We've got strong beliefs. We need to support climate change. We need to support climate mitigation and climate transition. But we must be sure that we are actually doing the right thing, i.e. that we are investing in projects which are actually helpful and which are actually supporting this transition. And this is why having kind of frameworks like taxonomies and applying the SDGs is for us something which is really important, because we will build our investment on some good research. We will generally engage the issuers in which we want to invest. But first and foremost, we need to first define an investment universe in order to prove able to do this safely and efficiently. I think that having this kind of alignment with taxonomies and indeed have efficient and accurate data is clearly the starting point for us. Because our journey is the following. We have launched a strategy which is called REGIO, which stands for Real Economic Green Investment Opportunity, alongside the IFC, by the way, applying IFC's guideline, which are indeed very rigorous, which is a very good thing. But still, we have discovered that some projects, some bonds are actually in the lighter shades of green, let's say. And simply because the way people think about them differ from one country to another, and not certainly in accordance with European standards, just to put it this way. Because still, it's a matter of fact, We are a global company with strong footprints in all emerging markets. And as you know, our name means Hong Kong Shanghai Banking Corporation. We tell you something of the origins of our group and its strong footprint in Asia. And this is why for us it's very important, but still very vast majority of our investors are generally your typical Western pension funds, and those guys are kind of picky, to tell you the truth. And this is why sometimes when we review projects, we see that it's not, let's say, pure transformation. Sometimes it's retrofitting. Is this satisfactory? Is this making sense? Yes, certainly. Is it satisfactory? Not necessarily, simply because it's not, let's say, fully in line with the values and the needs and requirements of our client. And this is why having this kind of reference point is certainly very important. Now, in terms of a framework, the SDGs are acting as a global framework, and that's very helpful. But as it's very global, there's also the issue that it's not, let's say, as thorough as it should be. This is why taxonomies are very helpful. But one point was made, and I think it's absolutely right, only having in mind a green taxonomy is probably not sufficient. Because, for instance, if you consider climate change, it's fair to say it's not purely environmental issues. This has many social implications. And this is why considering also the social aspects is certainly something which is very important and which is for us the way forward. Because for now, Regio, real economic green investment opportunity is focusing on green bonds. I think it could be worth broadening the spectrum in order to open new opportunities actually for the companies we are financing via our investments. Having sustainable bonds, having social bonds will be also very helpful. That's truly a nascent market, even in the Western world, but we will very much welcome the development of such a market, because we think it's our role, it's our fiduciary duty actually to be involved in this kind of development and really make sure we can, let's say, foster this kind of very positive trend. Because at the end of the day, for us, it's a no-brainer. This is something we have to do. And let's also be clear, it's a clear market opportunity for everybody. There's a lot of development in here. Lots of technologies are currently being developed, and we need to support all of this because we think it's clearly our role as a global investor. And I will stop there.
Thank you so much, Xavier. And we've covered a lot of ground. We're approaching the end of our session, and we would like to involve participants in kind of identifying what are the key challenges up ahead. We therefore have a short poll similar to what we did yesterday, and we request that you type one word into the chat that describes the most important ingredient to scale up the market for sustainability-focused financial products. So that's one word that describes the most important ingredient to scale up the market for sustainability-focused financial products. And that could be anything that you feel, particularly from your perspective in the financial sector ecosystem, that's needed to make this work. That's very interesting. We have one word that is currently dominating the word cloud, so commitment. We also see in community involvement, credibility, independent verification. Right, if you haven't shared your word yet, please do so. We have a few minutes left in the discussion. And I think now we're seeing very interesting concepts, incentives, regulation, and inclusivity. I think that's a very interesting word, how to include more stakeholders in this work. So with the last few minutes, I'd like to ask each of the panelists just to give their word and potentially a vision for what needs to be the next focus of work. Giorgio, I'd like to start with you.
Con gusto, gracias, Luis.
Yes, Luis, thank you very much. As final remarks, I could say that it is important to consider that many investors are going to concentrate their resources in different countries and different regions. So in that sense, the first challenge I see relies on having minimal standards for comparability and information correlation so that the investors can create equivalence between the investment, international investments, and also not de-incentivate the future taxonomies developed in a country. So they need to dialogue with other countries and regions to promote the maximum level of mobility of capital and the different investment projects that are completely sustainable, that have a positive impact in decreasing our carbon footprint and the different projections. And I coincide with the word commitment. There needs to be a commitment. This is not just a business or a need. It's a need to commit to decrease our carbon footprint. I would like to highlight and underline not to tropicalize the different better practices in other countries regarding the development and implementation of sustainable taxonomies, financial taxonomies that could be comparable. It is important that they are comparable. I am sure that, for example, it wouldn't be reasonable to adapt maybe the European Union taxonomy in Latin America without any changes. We seek to have a better comparability between the different taxonomies with the aim of having minimum standards for interoperability and definitions that are conform to give more certainty for institutional investments for their funds, both for banks regarding to their final projects. And to address the previous one, to have an important assessment of climate change aspects, because as a derived point, we have the importance of data. The lack of data or their limited quality makes it difficult to have the different medical criteria that the green projects involve, and having estimations and stop classifying a project or investment that leads to a lack of information. On that line, I would like to say that those green taxonomies have an initiative for the private sector instead of having the new regulatory imposition. Although we need clear rules, it is true that complying with regulation creates a high cost for banks, which could limit the different allocation of budgets for those projects. So we need to weigh in the different benefits and the cost, although the banks have the different dispositions of those resources, and they should not have excessive regulation. That is because, as my last point and my last challenge, beyond the green taxonomies, we need to achieve a better allocation of the different green resources flow. So in Latin America in particular, we have relatively low carbon emissions compared to the higher income countries. However, they are the most affected for the LP gas, for example. Besides our differences, we are one of the least contaminating regions, and yet we are the most affected. So we require higher financing flows to mitigate the negative effects and to compensate this. So green taxonomies are a great step, but they require additional methods to accelerate their actions into mitigating the different negative effects for greenhouse gas emissions, for example, and the collateral damages. We collaborate with those institutions. So thank you very much, Luis, for this opportunity.
Thank you so much, Giorgio. Enrico.
Yes, if we talk about the challenges, I think as the general challenge we have seen so far is that limited bankable and feasible sustainable related projects to be financed, and also integrated government policies to attract investors seeking sustainable instrument and to establish the market if we really want to scaling up the sustainable finance market instruments. And also as I think all the jurisdiction also seeing that because of the global and domestic macroeconomic condition, that affect the state budget limited capacity to fund the sustainable related projects, and also the private sector capability in mobilizing their capital expenditure to the green activity. So it is sum up to the, also if we see at the Indonesia with the geographical challenge, we have an issue or the challenge on accessibility to sustainable finance as comprises, because our country comprises many sub-regions and also islands with high variability of knowledge and income level. And also last but not least, the expertise and technical skills shortage to meet the financial demand. Thank you.
Thank you, Enrico. Anil, I invite you, very short, one word and a challenge. What will you need to implement your taxonomy?
I think for us, I think the next step would be the effective implementation of the taxonomy in the actions of the roadmap. So I think that would be the biggest task, and any country who's implementing or introducing a taxonomy would be the challenge, would be the effective implementation. So I think in the next level, we will also be facing the same. Especially, I think, as I mentioned in my remarks also, we are in the kind of a situation that we are kind of having challenging economic circumstances, as well as in the recovery process after the COVID. So during such time, how to basically, focus on green or sustainability would be a greater challenge for us, because the priority for the policymakers would be, recover from whatever the sources of finance that we, can source. That would be the priority. So having a balance between such priority and the sustainability would be a kind of a challenge in my view. We have to overcome that as well.
Fantastic, thank you. And then Xavier, I'm giving you the last word as a representative of the demand side for these types of assets. What is one thing that you need from this market to bring more capital to emerging markets?
More confidence, actually, and which means more quality, better quality data, and better transparency, increased transparency when it comes to the definition of a projects. And this is why somebody was alluding to second-party opinion. I think this is something which is very helpful. Taxonomies and SDGs will provide frameworks, but still we need some further assurance going to be provided by external bodies. We will do our due diligence ourselves, but certainly being helped by, let's say, this kind of second-party opinion will bring a lot of confidence to the process. I think this is what we need to bring.
Fantastic, thank you very much. And that brings our panel to a close. Thank you to our panelists for very rich contributions. We've kept track of everything that you've said, and we will be implementing it as part of the working group next steps. Thank you so much, and over to Georgia.
Thank you very much.